For those that don't know me, I kind of work at Microsoft in what's now called the Digital App Innovation and Something team. You put digital in front, which makes it much better. So I kind of tend to work on cloud first type things, building apps in Azure. And I'm not sure if besides the Microsoft guys, there are other people that have met me before. I think this is either first or second or third thing I've done in presentation terms. So this one's the introduction to Dapr. And obviously the biggest and most difficult thing about Dapr is how to spell the acronym, but most of the documents show it in that sort of form rather than all uppercase, which is just so trendy. So I'll just, this is where I'm using this new presenter mode. So in terms of what I hope you can get out of the session, this is the kind of the so what part of the presentation. So it's to understand that the issues in building distributed applications and the sort of challenges that creates, especially when you're moving from, for example, local development to deploying it in definitely Azure, but it could be another place. There is a section on, and hopefully we'll show you how Dapr itself helps in creating, in making sure that code that you write is portable and can be managed a lot better than if you were writing a lot of the stuff yourself, and that'll become slightly clearer. I'll be showing you what this looks like at the code level, and that will be including two frightening demos, one of which was how Dapr works locally, and the other one on AKS, our Kubernetes service. And of course, obviously, in the end, it's hopefully will give you a view on whether you might want to use Dapr in a future project. Next slide. So what I'm going to show you is just a few things on enterprise app development. I'm hoping to whiz through these slides relatively quickly so we can spend some more time on the stressful demo parts. So enterprise app development and the challenges that faces, how Dapr kind of works, what it might work, what it looks like in local development mode, and also how to install it on AKS and get stuff running on AKS. Because in the end, things like Kubernetes are the kind of the main target for Dapr. So what are the kind of enterprise development challenges? Over time, people are trying to build or asked to build resilient, scalable, and quite often now microservice-based applications, and they kind of interact with other services downstream, and potentially you're kind of having to build them in potentially multiple languages, whether you're doing them in multiple languages or different members of your teams or others working with you. So you've got different languages. Quite often you want to leverage existing code, and there's all sorts of new powerful models now, such as serverless, that can kind of help with these sorts of things. So all of these trends are going on, but fundamentally people want, customers and your managers want services building out faster and yet more reliable. They want all of the DevOpsy type stuff that means that you can reliably deploy them. So there's lots of expectations of enterprise developers now, and so because there's tons and tons of expectations, what's holding stuff back? So there aren't really that many tools for microservice runtimes, and especially when you're trying to transition from your sort of development environments up into your deployment environments, and it kind of limited language support and feature sets, and quite often the target environments aren't sort of targeting the nice sort of trendy containerized sort of targets that a lot of the exciting development is now on. So serverless and containers are really important, and we kind of need tools that sort of work well alongside these. And of course, distributed applications in their nature have lots of moving parts in lots of different places. And there's a sample up here where we've got a sort of a typical sort of shopping cart style application with a payment gateway, some integration to some shipping system. And what happens if you want to build this and suddenly somebody says, actually, our new standard is to use Cosmos DB instead of SQL Server. What is the best way of queuing stuff to fulfillment and all these sorts of things? So there are lots of decisions that as a developer's forced to make, or almost become implicit when you're writing the code. You kind of rather defer to later because you might change your mind, but the real problem is you've embedded a lot of those decisions in your code. Yeah. So the point of distributed application runtime is to provide a series of services to produce portable event-driven applications. So there's like a runtime element to it, as well as you have to express the connectivity between services through certain code constructs, which we'll see in a bit. But it's a distributed application runtime, and that targets both your kind of development environment and various other targets, such as Kubernetes, which it sits really well with Kubernetes type thing because there's a sidecar deployment, Azure functions, and also kind of standalone apps where you can actually build the engines of Dapr into the executable too. But we're going to be mainly concentrating on the development experience here, as well as the how it looks on AKS. So these are the goals, best practice building blocks, of course, that they're consistent, portable, and open. And the whole of Dapr is an open source project. You can decide which of those components you use, and you can do that in a number of different languages. And right at the end, it's kind of platform and agnostic in the sense of it's both cloud agnostic and can be run on edges as well. So it needn't be in the cloud, and so you can start building your code, your microservices that talk to other services in a way that doesn't tie them down to a deployment, whether that's on Azure or another cloud, or potentially, as I said here, on an edge type device. So that's the goal of Dapr. And so what this, in terms of its realization, through the center of this slide, you can see that there are a series of services that you can use one or more of. And we're going to look in detail, a little bit more detail on the obvious ones, and we'll put those to the back of the presentation. We won't get a chance to look at, for example, reliable actors and things like that. But effectively, it doesn't really matter whether your application code's in whatever, Go, Node, Python, .NET, Java, and it doesn't really matter at the bottom of, you can see on the bottom of the picture, whether you're targeting Azure itself, which is, as a Microsoft person, we'd love you to do that, but it can run on other environments too. And it's basically HTTP and gRPC are the sort of the protocols with which the components talk. So I don't know whether you're familiar with the notion of sidecars. A sidecar model is something that is a Kubernetes type thing, where effectively you plug extra behavior into an application and you have a sidecar pod. You have a sidecar container running alongside your main application container inside a single pod. And that allows effectively the sidecar to intercept all of the things in and out of your app. And that provides a lot of the hooks that not only allow you to direct requests from one place to another, but also provides the hooks for observability as well. Yeah, so it's all HTTP, and because it's a sidecar model, a lot of the requests to services are effectively through localhost. you see it's get and post. The usual story is it's kind of REST type things where you'd be doing post for updating and creating things, and gets for getting a resource. And these are just a bunch of examples. So, that bounced interestingly. Yes, so the main ones we're going to be looking at, and I think the first two you'll ever come across with Dapr are service invocation and state management. And because let's face it, if you're going to do anything with Dapr at all, service invocation is definitely something you absolutely need. State management is really very powerful, and potentially secret management. All of the other kind of services, such as pub/sub, build bindings and triggers and actors, are all things that have very specific use cases. And in my little demo, I'm not covering those, but they're very much useful things for architecting event-driven applications, but you won't use those all of the time. Yes, and so what this slide's trying to show here is that for each of these types of Dapr components, that you can have a number of you can have a number of implementations, and that's the whole point, is that your code is implementation neutral, and you can then decide later through configuration exactly, for example, in state stores, what is actually persisting the data. And there's Redis, Cosmos DB, and all of the open source state stores. And with going right to the bottom of the slide with observability, you can be using our stuff like App Insights, or you can be using Prometheus or some other sort of tools. But this is the whole point: is that your code becomes neutral, and you decide very late how you want stuff deploying. Yeah. Now, the other important thing is Dapr is on GitHub. It's an open source project, and when I quizzed one of our internal guys about this stuff, in terms of what's going on, he gave me some stats which are a couple of months old. That there is 90 odd external contributors. There's 28 components since it's launched, and I don't know what 5.8k GitHub stars is, but anyway, it sounds impressive. So there is a community of people. So it's a very much it's relatively new, very much a live thing, and is seeing quite a bit of traction with our customers. I'm personally talking about this with Dapr with a bank at the moment, although that's in the early stages. So I've kind of gone through the different building blocks, and effectively service-to-service invocation and state management are really the two biggies, the first things that anybody would ever look at. But secrets and the other ones in between. Yeah. So I'm going to cover the service-to-service and state management. And at the back of this slide deck, I don't know whether we publish the slide decks, there's a little bit more detail on the other ones, which I don't think everybody's going to use. So with service-to-service invocation, you can see there's like a URL format, and this is how you sort of call from one service to another. So there's a standard format, and invoke is, it's a post or a get invoke. And there is a whole pile of little DNS and stuff behind the scenes to make sure that requests get routed from one place to the other. Behind the scenes, Dapr does mutual TLS between the services as a security thing. So behind, internally in the Dapr implementation, there's a mini CA that is allowing mutual authentication between each of the Dapr components so that it can work in secure environments. And so effectively, it's routing via this mechanism of post through invoke. State management. I should say that it's very much adopting the model of state management that you'd have with microservices. We're we're really considering that each kind of each component in a microservice potentially has its own state management. It's not really a thing for dealing with complex relational models and things like that, and that's a very much a microservice thing that you are interested in persisting state and then getting state back, and that state, you know, is can be stored in a number of different places, but is effectively a kind of a piece of JSON in very much the same way that would happen with Redis and Cosmos DB. That was its previous name. And once again, there's a standard URL format for doing state management, and show you a bit of that in a state. So you can swap out, for example, Redis to Cosmos. Yeah, and effectively, the other thing about Dapr is that because it's by configuration, you can you effectively swap out the providers, and they provide a standard URL-based interface, which is what we're seeing here on the left-hand side, and there is a lovely piece of YAML on the right-hand side, which will effectively be the implementation of the component that's doing that thing. In this case, being the state store being a Redis service. Yeah, and you could then swap that out for Cosmos DB. Yes, Cosmos DB. So you'd have the same code, but a different sort of implementation by configuration. So observability is another really important part, because with any distributed system, one of the hardest parts is working out how stuff flows around the place, and you know, how long stuff takes, how to debug stuff, and whatever else. If you look at more traditional things inside Azure, you'll see that we have App Insights, and that does some very clever stuff of injecting a bunch of keys inside HTTP requests, which allow it through its logs to construct the flows. Dapr takes a slightly different approach in that, because you've got these sidecar components, you've got a natural sort of injection point all over the place. So in every pod there's a Dapr pod, whether it's inbound or outbound, there's the little sidecar thing which will allow any kind of request to be tracked and correlated and pushed to some sort of dashboard, which can be a number of different types of dashboard, including App Insights, of course. And it's doing through this open telemetry collector. I haven't really looked at this in detail, but effectively you can emit to a number of different services. Yeah, and that allows you to do things like distributed tracing, which is an incredibly important thing. And this, I think, is just a diagram from App Insights, from what I can see, where effectively you can work out, you know, the exact flow of a particular request, rather than just generally how things flow sort of at a high level. And that's just absolutely vital for working out, you know, when stuff's gone wrong, kind of why. And Dapr just makes that more straightforward because of the sidecar being embedded into each of the things, each of the components, allowing you to see what goes in and comes out. Okay, so where are we on time-wise, Phil? Because once again, metrics as well.
Yeah, 20 minutes in, John.
Okay, and out of 45.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So thanks, Phil. As a natural consequence of also being able to do stuff with the sidecar, you also get a load of metrics as well, and a lot of the metrics are coming out of the sidecar. Yeah. So the two that we're kind of interested in, that I'm going to be showing in here, are kind of self-hosted, which is kind of running locally, and you can self-host in runtime as well as kind of debug time, and Kubernetes, because for lots of microservices, Kubernetes are the target, and of course on Azure that's AKS. And I'm going to be demonstrating how you install Dapr and get it going on Kubernetes, if the demo gods are with me. So when you're doing stuff on your sort of desktop, it's all kind of done with Docker underneath. And Docker, and I'll show you this in a second, Docker will have a bunch of services running in it on your machine, but you do there's Dapr is when you install Dapr, you can do a Dapr run and you run your app, and then that behind the scenes interacts with the outside world through a bunch of containers that are running inside your local Docker. So when you install Dapr on a development machine, for instance, you will get these 3 services running afterwards. Yeah, and so a little diagram for that one, and I'll sort of show that in action. So demo times, this is where life gets much more interesting, because I'm going to have to switch to just different sharing. You have to let me know whether this screen. So can you see the screen I'm sharing?
I can. Assume everyone else.
Cool. Yeah, cool. As long as at least one of you can, it's showing. So we're in a kind of going into sort of demo mode now. This is where it gets slightly more interesting. There was a bunch of links at the end of this presentation, but right here is kind of where you'd start with Dapr. And I put this up because this is how to install Dapr in the CLI. So this is kind of where you'd start. And what I've got where it's in a different screen. So I'm just gonna. So what I'm going to be going through now. So I've just brought up some command prompts in Windows Subsystem for Linux, WSL. I spend a lot of time in there these days because if we're doing anything vaguely open sourcey, it's a great way of doing stuff. And what I'm going to be showing is what Dapr looks like on the command. Yeah, let's see, even if I spelled it. So when you install Dapr, there's a number of different commands. If you remember from a few seconds ago, there's a Dapr run, which runs an application. But there's a bunch of commands here to do everything from sort of invoke things, look at what's going on, the status of Dapr. So this is kind of where everything happens. If we look on a local Docker, and that's a really horrible way it's aligning itself there. As you see here, there's 3 containers that are running, and there is Redis here, which is a state store. There's a placement, which is, I think it's to do with the invocation, and Zipkin is a kind of a log viewer. So that's the observability part. So as soon as you install Dapr on your local development machine, these 3 containers run, and these survive reboot as well. They just keep running. So what I'm going to do is show you a little sort of demo app. And this is following the quick starts. There's a bunch of quick starts inside the Dapr docs, but they effectively point you to a GitHub repo here on Dapr. And there's this is the first quick start, and we're going to just quickly run through this. And this is a small node application that is an order processing thing. You can create a new order with a post, and you can get an order with a get verb. And as part of this sort of hello world, there's also another component which and this is Node.js, and there's another component shown in this diagram here, which is a bunch of Python, and that Python is prodding the Node API, and this is kind of showing you the flow. So the Python code, in order to get to the Node code, goes through its own little sidecar in its runtime in order to then call down to find the Node code here, and then when the Node code here is interacting with state, it goes through the Dapr runtime. So what does that really look like in terms of code? Because in the end, you want to see what the code looks like. So if I've got this one here, so and this is JavaScript. Yes, this is the chat. So this is a tiny piece of Node.js, and I don't know whether you guys are familiar with Node.js. After a while, all code looks similar-ish, but Node.js has some lovely kind of brackets and things which take a while to get used to. But what we can see here on this page is, first of all, this is a get. So this is saying that this is doing a get on this path, and what it's doing is it's doing a fetch, which is an HTTP request against this URL here, and this is kind of this is the kind of the Dapr URL. Because this is kind of the format of getting and dealing with state. So this one is getting an order because it's the order path, and that's all you need to do to get some state is you call that URL. Yeah. Now, if you want to push a new order into the system, it's kind of very similar in the sense that this part of the app has a new order path. But as you can see, it's a post. But the donkey work here it's just building a key value pair and injecting the actual order ID into the value here, and the post here, which is pushing state into whatever the state provider is literally a post to the state URL with and saying that it is a post and stringifying the body, which in this case is this chap here. So that's all the code in this mini app, which is the Node.js app, and one is pushing state in, which is this one, and the other one is querying state. So and you can see this one's slightly crude. It doesn't give you an ID. It's the last state item that went in the store. So that's not that realistic, but nevertheless, it is pushing state in and out. Now, if you recall earlier, there's a Python application, and the word evaded me for a second. There's a Python application which is pushing requests into the system to create new orders, and once again, that's really dead simple in the sense that here's the Python post. It's taking this URL that's here, which is the invoke syntax that was in the presentation earlier, and it's invoking, it's invoking the method new order, and it's then with this URL posting a JSON message, a JSON body into it, and then getting OK. So this thing is this is in a while loop, this particular one, but that's once again that's all the code. Yeah. So that is a Dapr app that is invoking stuff on the other Node.js app. So that's kind of what it looks like in terms of code. I'm just looking to see. Yes. So in terms of running the application, it's a Dapr run, and basically I give it the name of the application and what port to listen on, and then it just runs up. So this application is now running up inside Dapr, and we can and this is the node part because we said it's the node part, and therefore this is the bit that's actually persisting and getting. So I've got I've got I don't know whether you guys have come across this before. It's a great little extension to Visual Studio Code. It's called REST client or something, and it allows you, it does what Postman does, and it allows you to very quickly send HTTP requests. And this one's a post, and that is posting that order of that ID in, and I can then do a GET request using the same invoke syntax directly on the Node app, You see, it's the node app, and it's the order, whereas this one is the node app, and this is the new order. And if I, for example, punt in a different number as the last piece of state, oh, thank you very much, don't do that to me. That says OK, and then that'll come back with 99. So you can see state is being pushed in. So that's kind of sort of running that application. There are other couple of things that you can run and look at to help you. And if we get back to my tab here, there is I've got to run the dashboard up actually. So it's probably, is this up? Don't think it is. No, it isn't. So in one of these tabs, I've got a Dapr dashboard. So there's a dashboard which comes with the service, which allows you to see what applications are running in this instance of Dapr and go and look at the configuration of them. So this is kind of the Dapr dashboard that comes with Dapr. And that's just basically a kind of high level what services are running on this Dapr. Much more interesting if you're running it inside AKS, but we'll only be running 2 things in this at max. But also here we've got the observability part of things. So this is a little dashboard that is probably not running because I probably shut it down. It's probably might be running actually. So this is showing the requests that I've been making into the system, how long they took, and so you've already got with no effort at all some little thing will allow you to trace what's going on and look at the structure of the calls inside the app. Another part of the quick start that I was telling you about is this piece of Python, and this Python is just prodding things, and it will make the Zipkin thing look much more interesting if we prod it. So what I'm going to do is run up the bit of Python, and this is a Dapr run again, but I'm saying I want to run the Python app this time. And so this is up running, and what this is doing is hitting those APIs by basically just inserting, calling the node new order to insert a new order inside whatever the state store is, which is locally Redis. And hopefully we should be able to see that there's much more sort of activity going on. Yeah, and there are kind of a lot more items in the state. So I'm not sure what the dashboard's going to show us. I think it's going to show us that we've both got the Node app and the Python app running inside this Dapr app. So this is kind of the local experience and allows you to be building your apps and debugging them and looking at them and all inside your own machine using effectively a bunch of services that Dapr's installed on Docker. So that's the local experience world. We're now going to flip over and do the Kubernetes one. And how long have I got left?
10 minutes. Well, just over 10 minutes.
No,
well,
okay, it's not going to be too bad.
We started 5 minutes late, Paul.
Yeah. So this Kubernetes experience is pretty much the same app. Yeah. But it's going to look different because it's running inside Kubernetes, and but fundamentally it's the same app. And in this GitHub repo, there's a nice quick start where you can run this sort of stuff up. And I've got there's whole piles of prerequisites here, and I'm going to quickly run through these to show you how with a kind of a brand new AKS cluster. And I'm going into the Azure portal here. I don't know, for those of you that I'm familiar with, this is AKS inside Azure, and this is a cluster that I created about an hour ago, and there isn't a fat lot in it. It is basically an out-of-the-box Kubernetes cluster with nothing particularly in it. Now, so we're going to go through the process of taking this completely bare AKS cluster and sticking Dapr on it first, and then sticking those two applications that we just did. I've got these also in a little which one that time? Yeah, effectively it's the same. It's effectively the same app. We've got the Python one, which is the one that's going in the loop of punting things into new orders. You can see the code is identical. But what we've got here is where's the node one? The node chap is here. And you can see this is pretty much exactly, well, I think it is exactly the same code. But there are some little nice YAML files, one for the node and one for the Python, and one for us getting the state store installed onto AKS. So this project is almost identical to the other project, and probably just configuration different. So what I'm going to do is kick off the process of installing. This is where I hope that things go okay, because so what we first have to do is to make sure that our command line inside WSL is pointing at that cluster rather than the ones I've been rehearsing before, which are different clusters. So that's kind of why I'm doing that. And you've seen that the cluster's empty. And so all you need to do is to get Dapr on the cluster is to do Dapr init and saying, yeah, I want to init Kubernetes, because I've told it just now which cluster that is. It knows which one where to deploy it. So this is the install process, and it's not actually very fast. It's not very slow at all. So we can now, ping back into the Kubernetes cluster, and we'll probably find that some new stuff's appeared. So what we can see that we've got a brand new namespace that's come in the system just now, and if I look in the workloads, and you can see that now. See, this one hasn't actually finished yet. That we've got 4 little services all inside this Dapr system namespace. And if I refresh this, I'm hoping that this will actually go from yeah, come on, you can get there. I'll go on to the next step anyway. Yeah, so let's see why it's doing that. Is it just waiting? Yeah, it's still doing something. So so what we've done is we've sort of installed Dapr, and perhaps I should wait for it to finish, because I could create myself a problem if I don't. Okay, I think we're there now. Cool, we're all there. So it's all green, and the concern is that I rush and it's not finished. So what I'm going to do now is install Redis into the cluster in order for that to be the state management part of Dapr on this cluster, and that is some nice Helm stuff. And I'm just going to paste it in because this is all pretty boilerplate stuff. So yes, please can you paste? Just a second. Yeah, pasting limit. So this is installing Redis onto the cluster. As I said, this one probably tends to be one of the more slow things, and hopefully we'll see inside the cluster that some Redis stuff will appear at some point. I can't see any here at the moment. Can I see any Redis here? Not so far. Okay. Yeah. So this is plain Redis. This is nothing really right now to do with Dapr, but this is Redis, and I'm kind of curious as to why I'm not seeing this. Workloads. Pods. Let's see what pods we've got here. Kube system. Oh yeah, something's happening here. It's not quite finished yet. So the Redis stuff is still installing. So I'll give that a few seconds. Come on, you can do it. So right now we're still haven't got the Redis wired up to Dapr yet, and that will be the next step. And come on, container creating, come on.
You got 5 minutes, John.
Yeah, that'd be about right. I'll press ahead and see whether it all falls in the heap on the ground. So what I'm going to do now is install a bit of YAML, which I kind of showed you with the Redis one inside Visual Studio Code, and all this is doing is wiring up Redis as the state store for Dapr, yeah. And when that's finished, so I'll just check, yeah. Hopefully that will finish soon, and I won't need to rush it too much. Oh, it's all Redis has done its thing. So if we look inside our Visual Studio Code, where are we? Where Kubernetes? You can see that there's a bit of YAML for the Node application, and we'll start off with the Node application because that's much simpler to get. If we run out of time, we'll just stick with the Node one. If we've got enough time, we'll add the Python one too. So what we now do is, inside my command line, is to deploy the Node app, done the Redis one. The application that is the API that it does the new order post and does the get of order, yeah. So it does a get of order and a new order post, and that's the same code as the one that we ran locally. So this thing will be running, and I'll just check to see that the thing's actually finished creating by running another bit of kube control. Yeah, so this has created the little Node app, and if we quickly go inside here, we'll see a pod. We'll probably see. Let's look at the services. It's easier than looking at the pods. You can see that there's a Node app, and what we can see from this is, again, that's not the right one. Back too far. Go into the Node app. Yeah, you can see this is the Node app here, and just briefly here you can see that this is the Node app that we installed, and this is the little Dapr Sidecar. This is the Sidecar pod that's running in the same, Sidecar is running in the same pod as the Node app, and that's kind of this is the bit that does all of the indirection. So so that's kind of what gets deployed now, because the application is what do you call it? Because the application is on a private cluster, we're going to use a useful port forwarding thing to allow us to port forward requests to our local machine. So here we go. So this is kube control command, port forward. So if you've got a private cluster, with no public IP addresses, this still allows you to debug stuff by doing a port forward. You obviously can't use this in production, but this is a great means of effectively translating whatever that thing was doing to my local 8080 port on my machine. And so what I can see now, if we go into my Visual Studio Code, I've got my little REST request thing here, and I'm hoping that if this is working, yay! So I've punted an order ID of 99999 in here because that's being port forwarded to the right place. And likewise, if I do a get, I get the last order that I posted, and just to show you that's not made up stuff, I'll post a different order and then do a get on that one. So as you can see here, we've already got the Node app running on the Kubernetes cluster. It took almost no time at all. It was installing the Dapr runtime, installing the state store in this instance, the Redis state store, and making sure that the state store was wired up. And then I've just installed, provisioned this Node app into the AKS cluster, and I'm using port forwarding so that I can see kind of what's going on in there. And what else should I be showing? If we've only got a few minutes left, so the Python
You've got
one is
seconds, John, not minutes.
Okay, the Python one is very similar. So I'm going to go back to the deck now. The Python one is very similar. And how do I get rid of the share? Here, wait a sec. Yeah, so in terms of where to go next, you've kind of seen it, and hopefully we can share at least a PDF of this or something. So the main Dapr site is on Dapr.io. There is the corresponding GitHub repo, which has everything in it. So you just clone that thing into your WSL. In my case, you probably do that in Windows as well. WSL is cool though. Inside that are these quick starts, which show you how to do stuff locally and how to do stuff inside Kubernetes. And there's a YouTube link to a nice kind of buddying explainer in a very American-y type way thing, but it's nevertheless very, very useful. And there's another couple of links for other sorts of samples and approaches to using stuff with Dapr. So that hopefully you'll find those useful.